This is ego-utilitarianism. This is going to be a summary of the relative theory of value. What I've done is I've tried to boil down the relative theory of value into its essential arguments. Okay, so let's begin. The labor theory of value says the value of a good is derived from the labor inputs that went into that good's production. This is wrong because it's the relative value of a good that determines how much labor and other resources go into producing that good. If a value were truly determined by labor inputs, producers would never be concerned with making a profit or avoiding loss, since they would be guaranteed to recoup all the costs of producing that good. You don't see the vast majority of goods that aren't brought to market because they were thought to be unprofitable as far as how much labor inputs went into them versus what they thought they could sell it for. The intrinsic or objective theory of value says the properties of a good solely determine its value. This is wrong because the abilities of the consumer to utilize the properties of the good are just as important in determining the value of the good. The subjective theory of value says the only thing that matters in determining the value of a good is the consumer's mind and rejects the importance of the properties of the good. This is wrong because the mind is trying to determine relative value. Given the mind is composed of imperfect information and imperfect intelligence to process this information, the likelihood of error in determining the relative value of a good is virtually certain. The relative value of a good, the relative theory of value says that all value is relative. The value of a good to a consumer is a subset of all value. The value of a good to a particular consumer is just the marginal utility extracted by the consumer after consumption or utilization of the good to satisfy a goal. This result is consequential. The subjective valuation of a good is the expected marginal utility before consumption. This implies that the relative value of a good to a consumer is dependent upon the inherent properties of the good. If the goal of the consumer is to insulate against cold weather, then it is not up to the consumer's mind on how well a certain material, like cotton, down, plastic, or metal, can satisfy this goal, since the ability is inherent in the good itself, and therefore merely an objective fact. The consumer is trying to ascertain each material's ability to retain body heat and select the best material for their purposes. They don't have perfect knowledge and can and often make mistakes. It makes no sense to refer to the value of a good without the perspective or state and not the mind of the consumer. It's analogous to asking, what is the state of water without providing a temperature? The important aspects of the state of the consumer that is necessary in determining the relative value of a good include the consumer's ability to utilize the good toward those goals. The consumer variable in the relative value of a good function is the state of the consumer. It has no direct relation to the consumer's mind, making it merely non-subjective. Just like height, weight, and age of a person, the objectives, abilities, and external conditions of the consumer are relative and not subjective. So again, height, weight, and age, they vary from person to person. And you might want to call this subjective, but since it's not determined by the mind, these are relative to the individual. Just like the objective set, the abilities the consumer has and the external conditions surrounding the consumer, these are all relative things. They are not determined by the mind in whatsoever, other than objectives. Once they're set, though, once an objective has been chosen, it becomes objective. Once a goal, in other words. Like a chemical reaction between reactants, the relative value of a good to a consumer is a reaction of the inherent properties of the good and the abilities of the consumer to use that good to accomplish a goal. Relative value, so to sum up, relative value of a good can be written in terms of a function, and that's how I define relative. You can write it as a function of other things. So relative value of a good is the R function. Its two variables are the inherent properties of the good, of a particular good, and a particular consumer. So the only thing relevant about this consumer is his goals and abilities. So you can see the particular consumer is an implicit function of his goals and abilities. And both of these are relative but objective, merely are non-subjective things. They're not determined by the mind. Obviously, goals are determined by the mind, but once said, it becomes an objective fact. So again, so as you can see here, the relative value of a good can be determined by somebody else, given these two pieces of information. You give the consumer's goals and abilities, and you give the good and its inherent properties. You give these two pieces of information to any rational mind. They should be able to at least estimate the relative value of the good to that consumer. So you see, it's not dependent on the consumer's mind. As far as evaluating the relative value of the good, it can be done from any perspective. Okay, so this is a summary for the relative theory of value. If you have any questions, comments, criticisms, leave them in the comment section below. I've made this outline available to anyone watching this video in the comment section down below, in the info summary box down below. I'd appreciate any criticisms, or if you see any logical inconsistencies, we can debate about it, again, in the comment section down below. So like, comment, subscribe, share. Thanks for watching.